Hi, I'm Megan Walker and we are at the letter M in the A to Z of real-time marketing. And this one is going to be a long one. Hopefully it's something that people are really interested in knowing how they can take advantage of event triggers. So the letter M is for making event triggers. So we're going to look at two ways in which you could create an event trigger and then use it. There is potentially a bit of code that you might need to know. You could do stuff with C# if you know it. I don't, so I'm looking at what I would call the low or the potential low to mid sort of code type experience, but much easier to follow than, like I said, if you need to know C# or other types of coding language. So we're going to jump in, we're going to take a look at event triggers and how we make them. Okay, so let's go and have a look. So we are in the real-time marketing area. We're going to go into event triggers. Now, there's a whole list of event triggers that already exist within the marketing app. So we can see here, we've got all these ones that have a state of ready to use. They've got a name. I've put in to where we can see how many journeys that are being used, or how many journeys are using that trigger, and when it was created as well. So we can see a bit of information. Now, these triggers, some of them, they're created. For example, there's one that is when an opportunity is created or when a lead's created. You can't get in to make any changes to those provided triggers. So sometimes you might look at it and it's going to be hard to know exactly what it's doing. And the purpose of the trigger is to be able to use it to say, let's start somebody down the path of a journey. So if an opportunity is created, that would be the trigger to start somebody, a contact that's linked on that trigger, a contact that is on that opportunity, to start that and start them on a customer journey. So that's the purpose of our triggers. So if we go ahead and create a new event, so I'm going to start and make one where basically when a case is closed, we're going to go ahead and we're going to send a survey. So we're going to send a survey using customer voice. So this is a trigger used when a case is closed. So we're just putting in a bit of a description. Now, a couple of things to note before we go any further. The title of the event trigger, if I just put it in like that and I don't have any numbers or spaces or not spaces, hyphens or anything like that, the database name of that event trigger, which will be important later on in a moment in this video, if I do that, it's going to use just a GUID, a string of numbers that is the reference for our trigger. If I do it like this, then it will actually use those words, so it's a little bit easier to define or know that I'm picking my event trigger, the correct one, later on when we actually have to go and do a little bit of sort of creation of a flow. So try and keep the names or the titles of your event triggers as just words, no numbers, no hyphens or anything. Also, if you copy your event trigger, it does the same thing where it actually puts the word copy in it, and then it just is messy. So try and keep this as simple as possible in terms of the title. Use your description to explain what it's for rather than putting too much in the title. Okay, so the very first thing that we've got in our attributes is we have a contact. So our data type, what we're focusing on at the moment, is a contact. What that means is if a contact has triggered something to happen, an opportunity is created and a contact's linked to it, then that attribute customer data, that is determining, okay, it's a contact that must be triggering something. Let's go ahead and send them on that journey. So in the future, we'd be able to do other things, leads, maybe custom entities, I don't know. So at the moment, we're just going to look at contact for right now. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add in other attributes that we're then going to use to pass through into the trigger to be able to then use these in an email or something like that. So what I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm just putting in things that I think might be helpful to pass through this trigger so that when a case is closed, I'm able to get the title, the number, the description, the owner, I'm able to get information, pass through into our trigger, and then I can potentially use that in emails that I create where I use this sort of stuff. So the last thing that I'm adding on this that is important is I'm going to pass through a survey URL for the customer voice survey. Now, I would like to mention, if you have not looked at any of Amy Holden's blogs, please do. amyholden.com, I'll put a link in the description below. She's the person that figured out how we can actually have an event trigger to be able to send out a survey from customer voice. So I'm using this as an example, but she was the first one that wrote about it. She hasn't done a video, so I thought I'll use this as an example so you can see, but definitely walk through the steps of her video. All right, so let's carry on. So once I'm finished with all of the attributes that I want, I can then go ahead and I can review all the information, and then I can go ahead and click next, which will save this event trigger. Okay, so here's the part where if we were doing anything, like I said, with any sort of development in terms of using C# or anything like that to interact with this trigger and make the trigger happen, then we might go ahead and use some of the code snippets that are provided. And I do have an example that I'll show you. But this page right here, we are not going to necessarily do anything with this. We're going to use Power Automate that will actually create this. Now, what this does is, let's say, for example, which I'll show you, but let's say we were going to use this in a portal, and maybe we're going to have something that ran each time a case was created via a Power Apps portal. So what we would get is we would get some code that we would need to incorporate into our web page that was, when someone interacted with it and they did something and something was fired off using JavaScript or something like that, then that would be the start of our event trigger. Something happened on a web page, we're grabbing information and we're pushing it into the trigger that then is the cause or the catalyst that starts someone down a journey. So we can see here that in this code, first of all, we can see function track underscore MSDYNMKT for Microsoft Dynamics Marketing. And then we see the name of that trigger that we created, case closed, send survey. Then further on down, we see a bit of information, and then we see the properties, and those are the attributes that I created. Case description, case number, case owner, and so on. So we see that. So again, if we're using this on a web page of some kind, or we're using it somewhere else, maybe in an app that we've created that customers would be accessing, this is the important code, and we can see along the top there it shows, okay, here's some JavaScript, C# and so on. I need to put an initial step setup. I need to take that initial piece of code and then this one and combine them together so that when somebody's on a web page, then we can cause this trigger. So I'm going to show you here within a Power Apps portal, one that I've created previously. So if you've done any work with portals, you'll know that content snippets are a really simple, easy thing to use within your templates to say, let's call whatever is in this content snippet, and the name of the snippet is script event triggers main code. Whatever's in that content snippet, let's go ahead and call it and bring it into this template. So if I look at that specific content snippet that I've set up, so here we can see that we've got, if we go into the HTML, here we can see that there's the script that was provided. Now this ingestion key that it shows, this is unique to your environment. So I can take that script that's provided once I've created the event trigger and I can just put it in there. That is going to get pulled into my web template. Now what I need to do is I need to take the rest of that script that was provided that had all of my attributes in it, and I'm going to put it into the actual web page that is redirected to when somebody's created a case within a portal. We redirect them to this support homepage. So I create the case, submit it, it redirects and takes me there. So what I've done is I've used that page so that when somebody goes to it, if there is a case that's been created, what happens is it gets appended to the URL. So I'm basically saying the ID, if there's a case ID on that URL, then let's go ahead and have this JavaScript run, and then let's get all the information and get the case number, the case ID, let's get the case title, the type of case, and the case description. So what happens is someone submits a case, they get redirected, there's something in the URL, that triggers the JavaScript to run, gathers all the feedback, and then pushes that back through into that event trigger. Okay, so I wanted to show you an example of how you could potentially set up an event trigger that you could then use within, like I said, something like a Power Apps portal or something within your own web pages, that type of thing. So just something to keep in mind, like I said, event triggers, there's lots of different ways that you can create them. What we're going to look at now is we're going to look at, well, how could you create an event trigger and then force that trigger to run by using Power Automate. So we're back on the case closed send survey event trigger. The last thing that I need to do before I can actually use it is I need to press this button that says ready to use. So I need to go ahead and essentially make it live or publish it. So what's going to happen is it's going to show that it's now getting ready, so it's basically going through and it's going to end up being published. And what it's going to show is that it's not integrated anywhere. It's always going to have that message, because what we're going to do is ignore JavaScript, ignore C#, we're not going to put it anywhere, but instead we're going to have that trigger happen, and we're going to have that trigger happen when a case is closed in Dataverse, Dynamics 365, model-driven app, whatever you want to call it, and we're going to have that be the starting point of our flow. We're going to go through, we're going to grab information, we're going to generate an invitation to a customer voice survey, and then we're going to have that be our trigger. So now that this is ready to use, we can go ahead and we can actually go into Power Automate and we can build that. Now the first thing I'm going to do is just quickly, if you are considering something like this, we need to do a little bit on a survey and customer voice. We need to make sure that we have some variables where we've got case title, case number, and case owner, just so that we can then pass through that information also into the survey, so when someone opens it, it's a customized survey for them, so we can see what the case number and the case title and stuff like that is. So assuming we've got our survey and customer voice, we have our event trigger that we've created in the marketing app, and what we're then able to do is then we're going to be putting those things together within a flow in Power Automate. All right, so let's go into Power Automate. Our flow is going to be an automated cloud flow, and we're going to give it a name. So this is basically our case closure, and we're sending our survey. All right, so we're going to look for Dataverse, and it's when a row is added, modified, or deleted, and our change type is going to be added. No, our change type is going to be added or modified. So the table name is going to be case. So let's find that. And then our scope is going to be organization. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter the rows so that I'm looking only for this flow to run when the status code equals 3, which basically is resolved on a case. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a row by ID, and I'm going to go ahead and first of all, what I'm going to look for is the users table, because what I want to do is pass through the case owner's name just to make the email look a little bit nicer. So I'm just going to rename this. So we're basically getting the owner by taking the owner of the case and using that to look up in the users table and find the right person. So then what we're going to do is another get row by ID, and this time I'm going to get the contacts table and I'm going to get the contact that is on the case. Now, depending on how you do this with your cases, it might be that you use the customer table, or it might be that you have the contact field that you're using. So you just need to make sure that you are picking the correct ID that you use to find the contact correctly. All right, so our next step is we are going to use the customer voice connector, and we are going to use the create an invitation action step. Then what I'll do is I will get the project that my survey is tied to. So I need to pick from the correct environment, and then I'm going to go ahead and pick the correct survey. Now what I'm doing is I'm using information from the contact and also various other places to build up what this invitation will contain, which will be a personalized link for the person that was on the case, and it will contain information in there. Now the subject here is not the subject that will be on the email. The subject here is the subject that will be on the customer voice survey invitation activity that will be created and added to Database. So I'm then going to get the first name and the last name from the contact record that's linked to the case that we got in the third step in this flow. Then the regarding and the recipient, or the regarding I'm going to link to the incident, which is the database name for cases. So I'm going to link that to the incident and use the case ID. The recipient is the contact. So I'm going to put contact, comma, and then the contact ID. Then what I'm able to do is these three variables that I added to the survey, I can pass through the case title, the case number, and the case owner. So this is all about the actual creating the invitation for customer voice, okay? What I am then needing to do is once I've added that piece in, this still doesn't actually have anything to do with marketing. I need this case being modified, case being closed, I need the end result to actually use that event trigger and trigger it to send the customer on the journey. So I'm going to use the perform an unbound action step, and I'm going to search for the action name, which is the same name as the event trigger that I just created. So that's why I said it's important to make sure that you know what that is. So if you use hyphens and numbers, it's going to be just a long string. So I can tell which one is that one. So now I'm going to, similar to what we just did where we created an invitation, I'm passing through into those attributes that I added to my event trigger, and I'm passing through the description, case number, the case owner's name, the case title, and so on. The thing that I'm doing here now in the survey URL is the invitation link that I just generated in the create an invitation step. I'm passing that through, and then I can use that link on a button in an email that I create. Okay, so all of those pieces so far. Then we've got two fields that are basically timestamps that are saying when did this trigger start. So for that, I'm using an expression of UTC now, which is basically the current time and date stamp, and I'm putting the same thing into that second field as well. So I'm doing UTC now and then UTC now again. And then finally, we have two fields that are basically saying, okay, well, who is it that should go on the journey? So for that, we need to find the contact ID from our step where we got the contact, and we're going through and we're basically linking it so that we know this is the contact who's triggering this event based on this case being closed, and we want to send them on a journey. So I'm just going to rename that step, starts trigger, and that is the trigger that starts in Dynamics 365. And then we go ahead and save it, and now we've created our trigger in Dynamics 365 Marketing. We've created a flow in Power Automate that will then, the end final piece of it is actually going to start that trigger running. So we're bypassing the need to have to do anything with, like I said, C# or JavaScript or anything like that. So our integration status will always show that it's waiting for coding integration because we're not setting up any code for it. But we know that that's going to be running because it's going to be triggering from Power Automate. So that's how you make an event trigger. And like I said, I've shown you two different ways. Again, I'm going to post a link to Amy Holland's blog post about this, how she did it. So you can see step by step as well. That might be useful. And in other videos, we'll look at how do we then take that event trigger information and then put it into our email. Okay, so There's a lot, but one of the things I really love about this is that I could create an event trigger and not need to know any code. I do need to know about Power Automate and understand that, but it's a lot easier than having to go and get a developer to create something or put it on a website or anything like that. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Like I said, not easy, but certainly doable. So do you think you'll start using event triggers? Let me know. Hi, I'm Megan Walker. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you learned something from it. If you don't want to miss out on any other content, you can go ahead and click on my face below to subscribe. And if you want to watch the next video, you can do that by clicking over here and go ahead and get started. Thanks again.